Hey guys, Jacalyn here with Zenith Home Loans. Thank you for joining me for another one of my interview series. Today I have Dr. Justin Pochman with Wheatridge Animal Hospital. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Happy to be here, Jacalyn. Thanks.
Absolutely. So I wanted to interview you just because you're mine and my husband's absolute favorite veterinarian on the planet because you've helped us so much in the past. And I deal so much with clients who are moving into new houses and talking about getting a pet for a first time or moving their pet from a home maybe they've lived in their entire lives and into another one. So I thought you'd be super helpful in asking some of those questions. So
Sure.
why don't you tell us just a little bit about you and then we'll jump into some questions.
Sure. Absolutely. So I'm a general practitioner at Wheatridge Animal Hospital, as you had said. I've practiced here for about 7 years. The practice itself has been in the area since the 50s, so around a long time. And we're a large hospital that has primary care, which is what I function as. So vaccines, wellness visits, sick visits, dentistry, all that kind of stuff. And then we're also a multi-specialty hospital. So there's all kinds of specialists here to support us. And, I exclusively work with cats and dogs. And so some of your own cats and dogs I take care of, as you know. And it's been a passion of mine, just helping out clients, helping out animals. And so, it's a wonderful and rewarding profession. And obviously any advice I can help with folks in terms of their needs with getting new pets, relocating, medical advice, all that, I'm happy to help. So
Yeah, awesome. So why don't we just kind of start there with what are some of the best ways to help a pet adjust to a new space? Do you have any recommendations around that?
yeah, it's a fair question. Obviously it's going to depend so much around circumstances. Some animals are that you're bringing into a home they're going to be a lost and found animal that we don't know much about their history. Other pets are going to be new puppies that have been well socialized. Some have been around children, have been around adults, have been around other dogs, have been around cats, and others haven't. And so many of those variables will change what makes sense. But I think bringing any new pet into the home, I think like anything, spending some time and some consideration thinking about those things is a huge part of it. So some of the factors that I think are important are, what is the animal's background and comfort level? What is the home environment like? Are there going to be stressors like other pets? Are there going to be children? Are you in a home with a yard if it's a dog? Do you not have access to a yard if it's a cat? Are they going to be the only cat in the household or others? Because some cats do well around other cats. Lots of other cats don't appreciate being joined with other cats in the household. So a lot of those factors are important. Specifically, I guess, is your question about introducing new pets to the home or just thinking about getting a new pet? Or
either. Let's do thinking about getting a new pet.
Okay, so considerations for a new pet, I think, first and foremost, if you are an individual without a family, without significant others, think about what you're looking for in a pet. Think about things like noise that the animal's going to make and shedding, and what is their living environment, and do you plan on living in your home for a long time and or moving from year to year, those types of things, because all those impact what type of pet you have and how they're going to adjust to a home. I think other considerations are, do you want a baby? Do you want a kitten or a puppy? Are you willing to get an adult pet? If you get an adult pet, do you want a young pet? Do you want an older pet that's already been house trained and you want to rescue them and you're okay taking on medical issues that they've already come with, and or preparing yourself for the financial expectations of older animals tend to have more costly things occur in their life, medical situations and stuff. And so thinking about your ability to compensate for or account for that. And then I think, think about where you're at. Looking for a veterinarian is a huge thing. Thinking about, again, for a cat, do you want to keep it indoor versus outdoor? Because it's a very different circumstance from an environmental safety standpoint, that type of thing. As far as other things before you're getting a new pet, allergies, do you have allergies or other considerations like that? If you're in an apartment, what would you do for walking the pet and those kinds of things. Noise is another big one. If you have neighbors close by, how will that impact things? So another important consideration.
Right.
I think if you are, depending on your work-life balance, you know, a lot of people are now working from home, and that's makes it easier to have a pet, but it also, as we've seen in the past couple of years, a lot of animals have actually developed anxiety because folks are home so much and they're not getting socialized. So socialization is an important thing, and what you're going to do with your pet when you're away from the home is an important consideration. So outlining all of those things and having a plan is kind of the place to start.
Awesome. Awesome. And then what if I already have a pet, but I'm moving to a new space? So either I'm moving apartments or I bought a new house and we're moving across town. What are some things that we could do, whether it's a cat or a dog, just to make that transition a little bit easier?
Sure. So I think part of it is prepping for kind of veterinary care, things like that's important. Establish where your local veterinarians are in your new neighborhood or state or city, wherever you're moving to. I think about contact information. A lot of pets are going to be microchipped. And if they haven't been microchipped, it's a good way to make sure that you have current and relevant contact information if they were to escape or do all kinds of things. And you always worry about that when you're moving. They don't necessarily know where home is. They might be spooked. They might get out. You might have workmen or women that are coming into the home and might leave a door open and an animal could get away. So make sure that is up to date. Microchip and or tag and collar information. I think another consideration is, you know, what is so many people when you're moving into a home, you're trying to get settled. You're trying to move your furniture. You're trying to move your belongings, your personal effects. Not surprisingly, that's going to be like wildly unsettling and stressful for a pet. And so if you can possibly get set up before you actually move the pet, that's huge. Just because that, you know, moving furniture around and loud noises and construction and all those kinds of things can be terrifying for cats and dogs. And so anything to alleviate the stress of that transition is good. And even I would go so far as to say, if you can take time off and help your pet adjust and be home after you move so they can get acclimated to the new environment, that's also an important consideration, although not always feasible. So yeah, those are at least some things to think about. I think other things would be, if you're going into a yard with dogs or cats that are going to be outdoors, checking all the fence lines, making sure they're contained. That type of thing is also important. And then physically, the actual move itself, I think having a space that's already set up that can be a safe space, even if you can't do the things I mentioned, which is set up the whole house beforehand. If you can have a room where cat has litter box and sleeping area and cat tower or whatever you're using, dog has a bed and a crate, and, you know, can be away from the chaos if the whole move process takes days to weeks to get set up. So those are some considerations that I think can help folks in a move that might be upcoming.
Okay. And then what about, like, is there any like general rule of thumb when I'm bringing my pet who I've brought from another house, so I already had them, into a new space? Like, should I slowly introduce them to the entire house? Or once, let's say I've got them all settled and I had them confined in one place, is there anything wrong with just kind of letting them explore on their own? Or should you kind of just gradually introduce them to different spaces in the house?
Yeah, I think it's going to be so individually specific. I mean, obviously it's great when you have, you know, criteria that work in every instance. And I don't know that there is one. I certainly would advise starting, you know, in a more localized area that then you can gradually introduce them to the rest of the house. And it's going to be different for cats and dogs. I think cats, you typically want to introduce them more slowly, wait till they're acclimated. They're just such territorial creatures by nature. And so give them the time to adjust. And in either case, wait until they're acting ready and engaged with exploring the outdoor. And at that point, start to let them out. And so that might be minutes. You know, so many animals adjust very quickly, but not all. So you might have them have a home base and let them explore the house at their leisure not long after getting there, or it might be a week or even a month, you know? And so I would really advise you just go at your own pace based on the animals, you know, your knowledge of how your pet is behaving and acting.
That's helpful, because I feel like cats have a tendency to figure out the hiding spaces that you didn't know were there until you're
Very
like, oh
true.
crap, where's the cat? Because fortunately, when we moved into
Yes.
our house, we didn't have that, but I had a previous house that they figured out how to get up into that, in the walls through a laundry room. And I'm like,
Yes.
huh, I don't know how I'm getting you out of there. So this will be fun.
Yes. Yeah, pretty scary too. And
Yeah.
sometimes, like the ceiling above me, some homes will have, not many, but some have drop ceilings and they can get up in there
Yeah.
and like behind appliances and just all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
it's a good consideration.
Right. So let's see. You kind of touched on this, but when I'm preparing, if I've never had a pet before or I'm getting a new pet for the first time, I've obviously with
Mhm.
COVID and everything, everybody working from home, we saw a lot of animals get adopted, and now we're starting to see a lot of those animals get returned. Is there anything additional that I should take into consideration just to make sure I don't find myself in a position that I'm going to have to maybe return my pet? Obviously, if there's a health thing that I didn't know about, so I feel like that happens more often than not. But is there anything else that somebody should consider that may trigger them to return a pet that we just want to, because that's like, I'm sure the worst story you can hear is, oh yeah, I had to give my animal.
Sure. Sure. So I think there's a lot of reasons that people give up their pets, but the most common ones have to do with things like behavioral issues
Mm-hmm.
and unanticipated situations. So sometimes those behavioral issues are things that people didn't consider beforehand, and it ends
Mm-hmm.
up being a problem. Example being, I go to work, I leave my dog. The neighbor has called the cops 5 times because there's just barking.
Mm-hmm.
They've been chewing on the walls. There's
Yeah.
separation anxiety. That's a common story they'll hear. And I think certainly there is a time and a situation where you adopt a pet or you find a pet from a breeder and the situation doesn't work out, and
Mm-hmm.
your best option is to return the pet or bring it in to a shelter and relinquish it, or something, or a rescue group or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so certainly never encourage that if there's a solution to the problem that you
Mm-hmm.
can figure out. But in those instances where it has to happen, I think it's oftentimes in the pet's best interest, because it's not good to be in a home environment that doesn't work for
Yeah.
you or the pet.
Right.
So but some things that I could advise people, some steps people can take to try and avoid that situation. More than anything, I think it's preparation and know what you're getting into. The
Right.
vast majority of people, when they're getting pets and relinquishing them, it's oftentimes their first pet or the only pet in the home,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to folks that already have a pet and they bring a pet home. And so in that latter instance, it can be two pets not agreeing, and that one can be tricky
Yeah.
because there's not a lot you can do. But in the first situation where you're bringing in a pet, the majority of people that have to return them are returning them in a fairly short period of time for things that they didn't anticipate. And it's the
Okay.
example, it would be the dog that's too excited and needs too much exercise for their lifestyle and their ability to meet their exercise demands.
Mm-hmm.
You work too much, or your social life or your travel schedule or all of the above are such
Mm-hmm.
where you just can't accommodate that. Or the situation where you have a dog that's very vocal and you didn't anticipate that, and you're living in an apartment, or the
Mm-hmm.
destructive dog that's in a small environment that doesn't have a yard, that doesn't have other pets to play with and things like that. And so those considerations are, what are my financial capabilities is one consideration. Can I
Mm-hmm.
go to dog daycare? Can I get pet walkers? Can I get pet sitters to help
Mm-hmm.
have a dog have energy outlets and things like that? What am I looking for in a pet in terms of, am I okay with them shedding? Am I okay with a cat destroying my expensive furniture
Right.
by sharpening their claws? Am
Mm-hmm.
I okay with a dog that's not potty trained peeing on my rugs and I have to or my carpet and I have to replace them? And so the reality is, it's not a bad dog or cat that does
Yeah.
that. That's normal behavior. And when we're
Mm-hmm.
bringing an animal into our home, they have to learn what is kind of socially acceptable, and that requires training and other things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so not everybody thinks about those things before they get a pet, though. And so
Mm-hmm.
we all want a pet that is very easy, wonderful personality, does exactly what we want, and never does a
Mm-hmm.
bad thing.
Yeah.
I've never met that pet before.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think thinking about those types of things will help you from the start.
Yeah.
For example, you maybe don't want to get a puppy and you don't want to get a 1 or a 2-year-old excitable dog. Maybe you do want to get the 6 to 10-year-old older dog
Mm-hmm.
that is more mellow and is house trained and all these other things.
Mm-hmm.
Or you might want to get, a pair of cats instead of just one or something like that. And
Yeah.
so I think giving all of that consideration and talking about it as a family is an important thing. And to piggyback on top of that, if you're living with multiple people and there's multiple decision makers and there's family members involved, everybody has to be on the same page, because
Right.
that's another common situation that I'll see where somebody gets a pet and not everybody's on board, or somebody breaks with allergies or something like that. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. With the separation anxiety that you're starting to see with some pets because they're not getting that socialization, is that whether they developed it in that environment or they kind of come into it, or is that something you see successful with proper training and kind of reacclimating them to certain situations? Or is it one of those things where it's like, yeah, if you've got a really anxious animal, they're probably always going to be that way?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think a lot of things that we deem to be behavioral situations, it's multifactorial as far as what goes into the stress and the anxiety that a pet experiences. I think part of it is their underlying personality and disposition. So just like people, pets have personalities. And across a litter, you're going to see outgoing, gregarious dogs and cats, and you're going to see wallflower, shy, nervous cats. And so, and kind of everything in between. And so I think that that's a huge component. But then throughout the pandemic in particular, and but a lot of pets didn't get a lot of socialization around other people, around other animals, around new environments, around new situations, because so many of us were confined to our homes for so long. And so it allowed us to create these wonderful, strong bonds, but it also created unique challenges. And so the term I know a lot of people use is pandemic puppies and kittens. And a lot of those pets do have some anxiety that we see more than we had in the past. And so a huge part of that is that socialization piece. So specifically your question about, behavior training and addressing that anxiety and those stressors, is it something you can see improvement on? And I would absolutely say yes. Not in every case, but in most animals with both sensitization and desensitization to things they're fearful of, we're seeing a lot of improvement in dogs now that we're, more on the tail end of this pandemic, and people are getting back out more and animals are socializing more and all of that. A lot of animals are starting to cope with those types of stressors that they have in their life, the anxiety they have in their life, much better, but not in all situations. And so I think working with a trainer, working with your veterinarian, exploring options for addressing those issues, whether it's, via behavioral training techniques, whether it's with pharmacologic intervention. We do have medications that we can use to help in both short acting and long acting for stress relief and anxiety relief and stuff. And then I think hugely important is working with behavioral professionals. So a trainer is going to be someone who is experienced but not professionally educated in the art of pet and animal behavior. And so that function is much like a human psychologist would be a veterinary behaviorist. And so it's a veterinary doctor, so they're board licensed and certified just like I am, but they have advanced residency training in behavioral medicine. And so there's a few in the Denver area. There's certainly online veterinary behaviorists that work with clients, and they can be wonderful for bridging the gap and taking addressing behavioral issues to the next level. So.
Yeah. Awesome. And then what about, so aside from like behavioral stuff, if I've got a puppy or it's a dog that I've rescued, like our dog Lou was 2 or 3 when we got him, and he had some hesitancy with a lot of things. And he's a perfect example. They're like, oh yeah, he's super chill. I'm like, this dog is not chill. Like he's a spaz. So, and I mean, he's a wonderful dog. We totally hit the jackpot from the rescue perspective. But do you generally recommend somebody, like if I'm not experienced or I'm not that experienced in pet ownership, specifically when it comes to a dog, is seeking out some sort of training just so that I know how to better handle it? Do you see animals be more successful in their home environments that way versus somebody who maybe just like tries to wing it, so to speak, at home?
Sure. Yeah, I am a huge proponent of working with a trainer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they bring a lot of value, and really can help you given their own experience, and their own degree of expertise in terms of helping to train pets.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think working with a good trainer is an outstanding idea in most every circumstance.
Okay.
I think the thing about training in general is, as I said, there's not certifications that you get, or specific degrees in education that you get. And so it really depends on who the trainer is and what
Mm-hmm.
their approach to training is, what their
Okay.
techniques, how they use things. And so I'm a huge proponent of positive reinforcement as, a lasting way that you can affect positive change in an animal's life. And so, going back to Pavlov's,
Yeah.
um, hierarchy and training, techniques, positive reinforcement is when a behavior that's desirable is being displayed. You're rewarding that pet for that behavior to encourage them to continue with that behavior.
Okay.
So for example, puppies biting you in the hands, you don't give them attention, you don't talk to them, you don't give them treats, because they're going to say, oh, they're going to associate it's okay to bite in the hand,
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. When
Mm-hmm.
they're not and they're being good, that's when you go, good boy, good girl, here's your
Mm-hmm.
treat, you're doing wonderful, I want to play with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that type of thing can be a slower training approach, but it's been proven to be more effective and lasting in the long term without having negative ramifications. And so, talking to your trainers, inquiring, if you're doing research, talk to 3 or 4, inquire, what their approach is, what's their experience, what's their background,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how they got into this. Talking to folks, if you want testimonials or you're getting word of mouth recommendations, what have they accomplished in the past, what situations have they helped with training.
Mm-hmm.
Because some will primarily want to work with dogs that, or cats for that matter, but more so dogs, but dogs that are young, and you're dealing with crate training and potty training and, oral inhibition and all those kinds of things, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to some vets really like to work with, trainers really like to work with aggressive dogs and food
Yeah.
aggression and resource guarding and all that kind of stuff. And so finding out those types of experiences and finding somebody that jives with your kind of philosophy and approach to
Mm-hmm.
pet, parenting is
Yeah.
important.
Are there cat trainers? Because Champ needs a refresher.
Right, exactly. You know what? Totally, there are. And it's so funny because my kids love to watch cat and dog videos, like silly
Right.
videos on YouTube. And my wife was just asking me like a couple of days ago how people train their cat to use the toilet. Have you
Yeah.
ever seen videos of cats like
Yes.
using the toilet? And you're like,
Uh-huh.
what is going on? And a lot of times they're using clicker training and other techniques to,
Mm-hmm.
train their cat to do things. And so, absolutely, I mean, cats are sharp as a whip, and so they
Yeah.
can learn a lot of things. We just know that they're also equally independent and don't want to
Yeah.
listen to you a lot of times.
Yeah.
So
That's mostly the
your
case.
success, they're not nearly as willing to please as a dog
Yeah.
is. So
Well, and
in most
probably
instances.
he's 12 now. Wow, he's 12. Yeah, Champ's 12, and I think that ship might have sailed. So maybe
Yeah,
a future
fair
kitten.
enough.
We'll
Fair
try that
enough.
again.
He's a little
Um,
ornery too.
Slightly. What are the top hazards that you see pets come in for, as far as like they've ingested something or they've got into something? What do you see is the most common thing?
Sure. So specifically in Colorado, because that's where I've practiced my entire career, I think wildlife is one, and I'll dive
Mm-hmm.
into it, but ingesting plants is another.
Mm-hmm.
Ingesting substances and medications would be a third,
Mm-hmm.
illicit and non-illicit. Um, let's see. I think those are probably some of the big ones. So I
Mm-hmm.
think in terms of, animals, certainly we have some small and some big predators here in Colorado. So
Mm-hmm.
coyotes, foxes love to go after cats.
Yeah.
We I, I think there's a place for indoor outdoor cats, but generally speaking, I think, I and most of the people in my profession prefer indoor cats,
Mm-hmm.
when it's possible, just from the standpoint that there's so many pressures of
Yeah.
predators and cars and other
Right.
dangers and diseases outdoors. But, rattlesnakes, we have one species of poisonous rattlesnake here in Colorado, and that's the western, rattlesnake, also known as the prairie rattlesnake. So
Okay.
this time of year, we see snake bites, all the time coming into a hospital our size. And so, when you're out on trails, specifically around prairie dog towns, rattlers love to go into dog burrows, dog warrens, under bushes, all that kind of stuff. I think we only see the prairie rattlesnake up to around 7,500 feet or something like that. So it's mostly a front range problem. But yeah, dog parks and things like that, especially over on the western side of the city, will tend to see like a decent amount of rattlesnake bites come out of those types of areas. So that's another one for sure. We in terms of plants and things like that, there's certainly some house plants that can be toxic to dogs. That you'll see, things like the sago palm and even things like aloe and stuff like that aren't so much toxic as they can cause GI upset and diarrhea and other stuff. And so try not to let your animal nibble on houseplants is the bottom line. Lilies for cats is a big one. Highly toxic. Raisins for dogs. Let's see, chocolate. Anything with additive sugar sweeteners, specifically xylitol, that's one that dog liver they cannot metabolize, and so we can see that can be profoundly dangerous and can be fatal in dogs if they're ingesting your pack of gum or something like that. So similar, even like peanut butters that have added xylitol, just be careful of that type of thing, because that can also be toxic to dogs. So we have a bunch of outdoor plants, that are wild in Colorado that can be toxic to dogs. I don't feel like people are great at botany, but water hemlock and lupin and larkspur and gosh, there's a bunch of them. But the bottom line is same thing. It's one thing if your dog's chewing on roughage and grass, but try and avoid them chewing on shrubs and flowers and stuff.
That's fair. With the rattlesnake bites, do you see dogs generally survive that kind of a bite, or is that something that you're seeing more likely than not it's going to be fatal?
Yeah, great question. So fortunately here in Colorado with the Western rattler, it's not a highly potent toxin. And so rarely do we see fatality, but if left untreated, we absolutely can. So when dogs are experiencing rattlesnake bites, a percentage of them are going to be dry bites, meaning there's no venom injection, but you don't know until the dog starts to react. So the recommendation is always, if you're suspicious for a bite, a dog's under a bush, it yelps, when it comes back and it's pawing at its nose or its front leg, it's usually going underneath a bush. It happens on the front of the trunk, arms, chest, face, head, that kind of thing. Take them into a vet. You don't use tourniquets, don't suck poison, don't do anything like that. If you can, lift up an animal as quickly as you can, get them into a car and get them into a vet. And so, and the vast majority of those cases can be medically managed. It oftentimes requires hospitalization for a day to several days, fluids, pain meds. A lot of times we'll use antivenin, which is a product that's intended to counteract the effects of the poison. And so there's some other therapies that your vet may choose to use depending on the circumstances. But yeah, it's one where most of those patients will do just fine with supportive care. Only their face blows up like a balloon for a while and they're really uncomfortable.
Cool. I know we're short on time, so I'll just do one last question, especially with our temperatures that we've been experiencing here. Is there a temperature that is outside that is too hot to take pets out for a hike or a walk? I know with asphalt that can get really, really hot, but is there, because obviously I'm sure we're seeing heat exhaustion and people taking animals on hikes and things like that maybe shouldn't, but what temperature do you generally recommend? Maybe we just stay inside until it cools off.
Yeah, good question. So I typically recommend a lower temperature than most people think of. Really anything in the 80s for me is oftentimes too hot. If it's in direct sun, if you're out on a hike up to 90 degrees and it's predominantly in the shade, your pet's probably going to be just fine. But the vast majority, unless you're really under tree cover up on, the foothills and whatnot, the most of your walks and hikes are going to be outside and it's going to get pretty hot. And so as much as anything, you mentioned the feet, you can absolutely get your feet burned. They're more susceptible to injury there, but then also heat stroke and overheating is another big concern. So depending on the breed, it's also important, your short snouted dogs, so your boxers and your Boston Terriers and your English Bulldogs and your French Bulldogs and that type of thing. Those dogs don't transfer air as well, and it can be harder for them to cool off. And so dogs don't they don't have sweat glands like you and I. That's not how they have heat exchange. The vast majority of their heat exchange is due to ventilation. So when they're panting, they're not always thirsty. It's what we always think of, but a lot of times dogs are just hot. They're trying to cool off, trying to push heat out of the body. And so those guys, those smush-faced breeds, what we call Brachiocephalic dogs, they don't have the ability to move as much oxygen and so as much air and ventilate as well, and so it can be harder for them to cool off. So that's why, as a rule of thumb, I tend to go on the lower end and say about 80 degrees. So
awesome. That's super helpful. This was wonderfully informative. I really appreciate you taking the time. Any last items that you wish people knew about pet ownership or anything like that you want to share before we end it today?
I don't think so. I think the only other thing I was going to comment in relation to the heat thing is car temperatures. You know, a lot of people take their pet out to go shopping and do that kind of stuff. And so really a car can't be closed up in any heat above 70 degrees, or it can be very dangerous to an animal. And they can experience heat exhaustion. And so obviously it depends on how long you're out, but that's, you know, with my family, I always tell my wife and kids that we can't take the dogs if it's above 70, just because it could be potentially dangerous to them. So keep that in mind if you're taking your pets out and about. But other than that, I think anytime you're looking to bring a new pet into a home or a new environment, so much of it is just consideration and forethought. And obviously, if you don't even have a vet before, talk to a veterinarian. If you want advice, reach out to friends and family, you know, communicate with people and try and find a situation that you think is amenable and go from there. So we're always here to help as medical professionals. So
very cool. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for doing this for us.
My pleasure.
We'll include some information about Wheatridge Animal Hospital, so that way if people want to come see you, I highly recommend the facility. It's fantastic with everything that you guys have helped us with all of our animals. So we appreciate everything that you do for us, for our pets, and just keeping a little bit of sanity in the room when animals get sick, because that's always hard.
Sure thing. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for including me.
Absolutely.